I am curious, where did you meet your husband?
Oh, it's a very Washington, D.C. story. So we met at the U.S. Department of Education when I was an attorney there.
Oh my gosh.
Actually, when I was going on the market to become a professor, I ran into the secretary on my flight to an interview. I was like, I'm one of your attorneys. And so he said, sure, come sit with me. So I sat on a flight with the U.S. Secretary of Education, Rod Page, and we just talked. So one of the things to understand about working for the government is very hierarchical.
Yes.
You do not approach the secretary and talk to them about policy issues. And so I got back to my office, and the general counsel calls me, and he said, did you approach the secretary on a plane and chat with him about policy? And I said, yes, I did. He said, okay, well, the secretary enjoyed the conversation. He wants to meet with you. And so when I went to meet with the secretary, my husband was the meeting before me with the Secretary of Education.
No.
And my husband was walking out, and I was walking in, and he just said, hi, I'm Gerard Robinson.
This is Admissible. I'm Natalie Blazer, Dean of Admissions at UVA Law. I'm so excited for today's episode because my guest is a celebrity of sorts. She gets mentioned all the time in applications that I read to UVA Law, and I'm so honored that she's joining me today in the studio. Kimberly Jenkins Robinson is a professor at UVA Law, as well as a professor at both the School of Education and Human Development and the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy, all right here at UVA. She is one of the nation's leading education law experts and speaks throughout the United States about K-20 educational equity, school funding, education and democracy, equal opportunity, civil rights, Title IX, and federalism. In 2023, Professor Robinson launched the Education Rights Institute and serves as its director. Under her leadership, the Education Rights Institute supports scholarship and engagement about a federal right to education, the key building blocks of a high-quality education and opportunity gaps in the delivery of those building blocks, as well as how school districts can best comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Professor Robinson also serves as director of UVA Law's Center for the Study of Race and Law. She was nominated and selected to be a recipient of the 2023-2024 All-University Teaching Award at UVA, which recognizes the most dedicated instructors at the university. Before Robinson began her career as a professor, she practiced law in the General Counsel's Office of the U.S. Department of Education and as an education litigation attorney with Hogan & Hartson Law Firm in Washington, D.C., now Hogan Lovells. She also served as a clerk for Judge James R. Browning of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco. Robinson graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School and with a B.A. in Foreign Affairs from the University of Virginia, where she was an Eccles Scholar. I need listeners to know that this is an extremely, extremely shortened biography / introduction of Professor Robinson. For the sake of time, I didn't even get into the numerous books and law review articles that she has authored. Suffice it to say, her scholarship has been incredibly influential in a number of legal fields, and I really encourage listeners to go read her full biography on the UVA Law website whenever they have a moment. Welcome to the show, Professor Robinson. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I mentioned in my introduction that I couldn't possibly, do justice to your entire biography. But I do like to start each show with maybe like a fun fact or something that folks might not know about you.
I would say one fun fact about me is that if I was not a law professor, I would be a luxury event planner.
Oh my gosh.
And that is because I love putting on a beautiful event. It brings me joy, and I love particularly like curating the flowers and like the gifts for guests and just making everyone feel welcome and special and just having it be memorable and impactful. Like I think events have the capacity to bring people together. And so, but I mean a well-curated event, not just throw some pizza boxes on a table and call it an event.
Wow, I love this. So do you do this for like friends and family kind of on the side or?
No, I actually, now that I run the Education Rights Institute, I do curate events in a particular way. And my team knows that that is my alternative career. If this whole law school professor thing goes belly up, they know that that's what I will end up like
Well, as much as I want you to keep teaching for a very long time, I also would be very interested to see this business get off the ground. So I love that. Great fun fact. So I do want to dive into the Education Rights Institute, but I kind of want to start with your background. Where did you grow up? How did you get to UVA for undergrad?
So I grew up actually in Midlothian, Virginia, which is a suburb of Richmond. So only about a little over an hour from here. And UVA was definitely always sort of a top school that people at my high school would apply to. It's interesting. Looking back, I really loved my experience at UVA. I applied to a handful of other schools, but I didn't apply that many. Our daughter is currently applying to schools, and she's in the double digits.
Different times now, I feel, with people applying to college. It's just... Definitely. So it sounds like you enjoyed your time at UVA.
I did.
While you were in school, I'm curious, was law school kind of percolating at that point, or how did you first decide you wanted to go to law school?
So I decided I wanted to go to law school by high school, actually.
Oh, wow.
So when I came to UVA, I actually knew I wanted to go to law school. So my father is a civil rights attorney. He passed away in 2020, but he really talked a lot about his work in civil rights, how he was helping defend people's rights in employment against employment discrimination. And so we heard about that quite a bit at the dinner table. And so I really wanted to go off and help people in the way that my dad was helping people. But I thought that his generation had really handled all of the civil rights issues. And so I actually came to UVA and studied foreign affairs because I wanted to be a human rights lawyer and go overseas and help defend people's human rights that were being violated around the world. And then at UVA, I had wonderful professors like Julian Bond and others who helped me to see that the civil rights movement that began here still was unfinished. And so I began at UVA to really think about focusing domestically and kind of continue that work that my father had done. And so I even had a defense attorney actually at an internship I did. So I did an internship as an undergrad at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office in Richmond. And I met a defense attorney there who said, "Why are you going overseas to defend people's rights when people's rights are violated here every day?" And that really, you can tell, I still remember it. It was a very profound moment. I was like, wow, that's a really, and by then I'd started to see how much work still needed to be done on civil rights. I think growing up, we were in the suburbs, and there were some things that I was seeing, but not as much as when you start to really look across the country at the reality for many people. Definitely at UVA, I started to realize a broader world and see inequality was much more common than I had realized, and people's rights being violated was much more common. So then I decided to, so I'd already decided to go to law school. One of my longest friends is a UVA alum, and she and I went to elementary, middle, and high school together. And so we always wanted to have a law firm together. So her name is Mary Manley, and she and I we had our maiden names then. So it was, my last name was Jenkins, hers was German. And so we debated whether it was going to be German and Jenkins or Jenkins and German. But either way, we in high school joked that we were going to have a law firm, which we did actually not do.
Oh.
We did not do that. But she is a lawyer here in town.
Oh my
She
gosh.
actually works for UVA now.
Oh, wow.
Yes. She's an alum of the law school, and
I love that.
works at UVA. Yeah, she's here in town. Yeah,
well, maybe.
Full circle, very full circle.
Very full circle. I love that your father had such a, obviously, huge impact on what you wanted to do. And I also love that he sort of gave you the impression that those issues had been handled or, in a young person's mind. He was handling it. Wouldn't that be great if we could, I just, that's so powerful. Did I also read that he coached Arthur Ashe in tennis? I feel like I read this.
Yes, he's a friend of Arthur Ashe. And my brother and I and my mom, along with him, went to their wedding. And
oh my God.
Yeah, it was really, so in my office, when students who come to UVA come by, there's a signed poster of Arthur Ashe in my office.
Oh my gosh. Are you a tennis player?
I am actually trying to get back to tennis right now.
Great.
I played all through high school and then really took a break when I was at UVA. But I'm slowly getting back into it.
That's great.
Which is really fun. I think it's a lifelong sport. My dad played into his 80s.
Wow.
And so I'm like, well, I could pick this up now and have 30 good years in this sport.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Oh, I love that.
I'm getting back to it. And actually, can I just share one more fun thing about him?
Please.
So in August, my middle daughter and I were able to attend the U.S. Open.
Arthur Ashe Stadium.
Yes, and it was because they were honoring Black players who had broken the color line. And he was one of the first Black players to play at the U.S. Open.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes. So she and I got invited along with many other families of Black players, like living and not living, for the 75th anniversary celebration of Althea Gibson.
Wow.
And so there was this big event and celebration. There was a breakfast, and then you got to watch a match and the President's Suite. It was amazing. And actually, the head of USTA is a UVA alum.
You're
really
kidding.
Lovely gentleman, yeah.
Oh, wow. I have to say, when I lived in New York, going to the U.S. Open was like my favorite thing to do. It's such a special experience. But how cool is that? Oh, my God.
Yes,
well, now I feel
really
like you
fun.
have to get back to playing tennis.
No, I will say that did kind of give me the bug
Yeah.
again. I was like, oh, this is such a great sport.
Yeah.
I met people who knew my dad that he had coached. It was just
Wow.
such an amazing event. I
Really
really
cool.
loved it. And I was like, oh, yeah, I got to get back to the sport.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad you shared that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your friend who is a UVA Law alum.
Yeah.
You did not go to UVA Law.
I did
You went
not.
to Harvard Law. I'm curious, was law school what you expected it to be?
You know, what's funny is when I was a UVA undergrad, I studied at the law school library.
Oh, my gosh.
So I used to originally study at the undergrad libraries, but they were sort of very chatty, and I need quiet to think and study. So I lived at Copley across the street, and I just walked over to law school and studied. Now I know, being a law school professor, that the law students don't love the undergrads hanging out. But I'm raising my hand. I was one of those undergrads who I just loved how quiet it was. The students were very focused, and I needed that quiet to get my work done.
Yeah.
And so I'd been in a law school building quite a bit. Law school at Harvard was very competitive. So I'm very collaborative by nature, and it was definitely it was a lot of really smart people in a small space. And so it's sort of a little bit of game of one-upsmanship, which I tried to stay far away from. So that part I did not love, that whole, but I met some really lovely people, have lifelong friends from there, and really had an amazing and very rigorous legal education.
I can only imagine. So you began your career in private practice and you did a clerkship, but did you always kind of know that either you wanted to teach or that education rights were particularly important to you, or how did you arrive at that place?
Yeah, so I actually decided to focus on education law during law school. Okay. So I was taking a variety of classes on different civil rights issues, and everything that I was learning seemed to point to the fact that the education system is fundamentally broken and that it's contributing to a variety of problems in criminal law, in voting participation, in health outcomes. Like, all of this have strong correlations with education. And so ultimately, I believe that, if we could really build an education system where all students enjoyed a high-quality education, then we would start to see less crime. We would start to see more voter participation. We would start to see better health outcomes. We would see a variety of ripple effects from a stronger education system. And so I ultimately, in law school, I was taking a variety of things. I actually didn't take education law, but it would come up in a lot of my classes anyway, because it would be, an umbrella course. And so it would be part of a course, but not the focus. And so I just really felt like this is one of the issues that's a problem. And so I spent a summer at what's now called Hogan Lovells. Then it was called Hogan and Hartson. And they had a strong education practice. And so I spent some time with them. They were representing school districts and universities, and I was definitely hooked. Like, I just loved their practice and was really excited. And that is where I went off to after my clerkship.
So you were at Hogan you were already practicing sort of education, what would you call it? Education rights, law. Education law. And then you ended up going to the U.S. Department of Education in the general counsel's office, right?
Yep.
So what was that like on a day-to-day? Like, what exactly were you working on?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I was in law school, I didn't think about working for the government. That just wasn't, I either was going to go represent individual plaintiffs or I was going to be at a firm or at a nonprofit, but government was not something I was planning to do. But when I was representing school districts and universities, what I saw is that we were constantly looking to the U.S. Department of Education to see what they said about something. And so because that was something that I started to see the influence of, that the regulations that they drafted and promulgated were what was binding us. You know, they were interpreting all the statutes. They were issuing guidance that then we would have to notify our clients. The U.S. Department of Education has issued guidance. Here's what it means for your schools. I was like, well, maybe I could just go help to write the guidance.
Right.
And then I can help to influence what's happening. So I loved working in the General Counsel's office at the U.S. Department of Education because a significant group of attorneys, I can't remember how big the office was back then, but it was at least 80 attorneys.
Wow.
I know, which people don't realize how many
my gosh.
attorneys are helping to, support our nation's education system. But I was in the Division of Educational Equity and Research. And so we were helping to draft policy and guidance about civil rights. So we worked closely with the Office for Civil Rights. And so we collaborated with those attorneys. We would often sit around a big table to discuss like the fine nuances of regulations. What's the goals of the regulation? Someone would put a draft together. We'd all circulate it. We'd mark it up. We would discuss it. And we would discuss like every word because when it goes out to the whole nation, every word better be right. Mm-hmm. And so I loved that collaborative work. When I was doing litigation for Hogan, it's much more confrontational in your face. And I'm just a collaborative person by nature, so that didn't really suit my personality as well as sitting around and figuring out what is best for the nation, what would help. And there weren't necessarily easy answers, but we were determined to find them, at least find the best answer that we could craft. And so that office really had just an amazing group of attorneys, all of whom were committed to student success and well-being and thriving. And so it was a really amazing place to work.
Do you have a particular regulation or issue you were working on, to give folks an example of something that you contributed to and helped write during that time?
Yeah, so I helped draft the regulation that allows for single-sex public schools. So that was prohibited for many years when Title IX was passed. And then both Democrats and Republicans wanted more flexibility from the regulation to be able to experiment with it. And so they contacted the department and said, you need to give us a little more leeway, that it should not be only private school students that can experience a single-sex education. It should be that some public schools can offer this well, and you just need to put the guardrails in to make sure that it's done equally and in a way that's fair to both sexes. And then when I teach the regulation in class, I have students mark it up and say what they find wrong. And you can always rewrite something.
Yeah.
So it's I don't tell them till I'm done. I guess now it's out there. But I don't tell them till I'm done that I helped write the regulation. But it was a team of people, so I don't take any criticism personally.
Right, sure. Yeah. I have so many questions. So I want to talk about sort of the issues sort of facing the right to education.
Oh, right. Yeah, we need to circle back to that.
Right. So can you just frame it up for people?
Yeah. So in the United States, we do not have a federal right to education. If you look back in the Brown versus Board of Education decision, one thing that the court says when it says separate is unconstitutional. It also says, education, if a state determines to provide it, is a right that should be available on equal terms. And so for quite some time, lawyers thought that if they took to the court a federal right to education, that they might be able to build on that Brown language to get a federal right to education recognized. Fast forward in 1973, the Supreme Court in San Antonio Independent School District versus Rodriguez held that there is not a constitutional right to education in the United States. So they said it's neither explicitly in the Constitution, which of course you can read it, and the word education doesn't appear, but they said implicitly there was no basis for recognizing it. And they gave several reasons for that. One, they said, first, we are not the experts on education, so we really don't feel like we should be deciding what the nation's, each of the districts and the state's education system should look like. And then they also talked about federalism and the need for states and localities to decide what their education system looked like, not the federal government. They also raised the question of, does money matter? And they said the social scientists were very split at the time on whether money matters for education. Social scientists now agree that money spent well for schools makes a significant difference,
Sure.
which is not surprising that it took decades for social scientists to sort of prove it, that when you invest in schools, you get better school environments and higher quality teachers and better outcomes.
That seems obvious.
But with the court, you have to prove it.
Sure, yeah.
So there are social scientists who spent careers proving this point. But now it's a consensus, so people aren't really trying to prove that anymore. There is not a federal right to education. So any rights to education writ large are really located in state constitutions and in state laws. And so each of the states does have a state right to education, but there's not a federal right to education. There are a variety of federal education rights, like the right to be free from discrimination based on race, color, or national origin under Title VI, the right to be free from sex discrimination under Title IX, the right to not be discriminated against on the basis of disability in Section 504. So there's a whole array of education rights. But in terms of the right to an education, those live in state constitutions. And so there are 50 different constitutions plus D.C.
Are you applying to law school because you're passionate about pursuing a career in public service? If you missed it, be sure to go back and listen to Season 6, Episode 6 of the show, where Assistant Dean for Public Service Ryan Faulkner joined me to discuss how UVA law grads are uniquely poised to secure competitive public service jobs, and how our one-on-one career counseling helps students to confront an ever-shifting legal landscape.
Public service you're interested in because it's, helping people, and it's, usually has some relationship to some sort of policy. So those things are always impacting us. But it changes our counseling in the sense that we are now talking to people about, in many ways, maintaining and having to live with a certain amount of uncertainty that nobody likes to have.
Right.
But then it also just means we have to be more creative, right? So you're now thinking about things that other types of public service work that maybe you wouldn't have thought about if you had just followed the herd towards the thing that is most common to do. And so we're having to be more creative and say, well, how do you feel about state and local government? How do you feel about nonprofit work that is protected and relatively insulated? How do you feel about doing public defense work? How do you feel about doing other things? But it's just a matter of being creative and figuring out, okay, let's buckle up and figure out how to address this situation, figure out where might be safe, while also being candid about it might be harder. You might not have the same salary, you might not have the same stability, but the need isn't going away for the most part of the type of work that needs to be done.
Can you share a little bit about what your idea was and how you basically made it come to fruition in the Education Rights Institute?
So I had been teaching for maybe about 17 years by then, so a really long time. I had edited 2 books. I had written lots of articles. I, done a variety of things. But I really missed impacting students' lives in K-12 education because that's what I was doing at the U.S. Department of Education, and that's what I was doing when I represented school districts. And so I missed this opportunity to help shape the education landscape that I knew was deeply broken. And so I had someone approach me from a foundation and say, we're doing a listening tour around education. People said that we should talk to you, tell us what you're thinking about these days. What do you think should be different about our education system? Where do you think it's, fundamentally flawed, and what potential do you think it has for reform? And so I talked with them a couple of times, and they sort of just kind of were picking my brain about education and reform and all of that. And it was just a very low-key conversation. And then as I thought about what I was wanted to do next. I was getting some opportunities for leadership and other things. And I ultimately thought about what's possible. And I said, I really would be very interested in a variety of types of leadership, but one of the types of leadership would be developing my own institute. And so the idea for the Education Rights Institute is to turn equal educational opportunity from rhetoric to reality. So right now, if you look at our laws, it seems like we should have equal educational opportunity, but if you look at our schools, we clearly don't. There's a gap,
So true.
a large gap between what the law says we should have and what students are experiencing. And so I've written a lot about educational opportunity gaps and the need to close those gaps. And so one of our priorities is to help people, and not people, school districts and schools and ultimately states, identify, measure, and close educational opportunity gaps so that all students can access a high-quality public education. So that's one of the things that we focus on. And then another thing that we focus on, in addition to just elevating the importance of a high-quality public education, is helping educators, principals, school district leaders, school board members understand and implement civil rights protections. And we focus specifically on those that prevent and prohibit race, color, and national origin discrimination because they're just not widely understood and receive a lack of attention. So, for example, most teachers could probably tell you what the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act requires for students, that they're entitled to a free, appropriate public education, that they get an IEP, an individualized education plan, and that they have rights about that. A lot of teachers and educators, I would say probably more than 50%, probably can't explain exactly what the protections are from discrimination based on race, color, and national origin, and all of its various forms. So not just intentional discrimination, but there's also something called disparate impact discrimination, which is when something has the effect of discriminating, but it's not intended. There's also retaliation if you raise an issue around race, color, and national origin discrimination. There's, hostile environment and racial harassment that occurs. There's just a whole array of things to understand to fully implement civil rights protections. And one of the things I saw being in the field for so long is that it's not understood at the classroom and school and district level. People really rely on the district attorney to understand it, but that's never going to turn it into reality. It's just a handful of people at the district level that understand these protections, but they're not understood all the way down at the classroom level. And so because of that, they're just not a reality for students.
Can you give an example? I'm curious so folks can understand, like, on a day-to-day basis. Like, you first mentioned the gaps, like identifying and closing the gaps. What is an example of, like, an educational opportunity gap?
So one example are school funding gaps. They're sort of one of the most harmful and foundational gaps that we have. And so what we see is that we are a nation where students who are from lower income communities and families get less funding for their education, and students from higher income families get more money for their education. These are public schools.
I was going to say, we're talking just public schools.
This is just public.
Right.
What's really interesting about that is we are an outlier among developed nations. Other nations know that the research is clear that you need to give children from low-income communities more funding to address the panoply of things that accompany poverty, such as housing instability, having a single-parent home, lack of resources for health care, or resources for things for school. And so most other countries give more money to low-income communities, and we give more to high-income communities. So it's very upside down.
Wow.
And so this gap was one of the first ones that we produced a report on. And the things we do at the Institute to make people aware of issues is we do a scholarly report on it that explains the issue. We do a survey of the research, and we bring it all together in one place. But then we also do these short videos. So we do 2-minute videos, usually 2 for each report. And that's meant to like hit the highlights so that you can just understand it easily. And then we translate it further into these 1-page guides where we take the highlights and we give it to you 1 page front and back so that you can explain it easily to someone, right? Because educators, school board members, others, they're very busy. They may not want to read the longer report, but they will read a 2-page document, right? That gives them the highlights. And then if they want to learn more, we refer always to the pages where they can turn in the report. And then most recently, we just did our very first webinar. So that was yesterday.
Oh, so exciting.
So yesterday we did a webinar for educators that explained Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which has been in the news a ton, but people really don't understand what Title VI says. Information coming out of the Department of Education has created some confusion around what's permissible. And so we hosted a webinar and we talked about here's what Title VI says, here's what it requires, here's what's prohibited, here's what's permissible.
Absolutely. There is definitely, I mean, as someone working in higher ed and especially admissions, which is always very fraught, there is confusion and there's fear, I think. You know, we think we know what the law is, but it seems that there are quote unquote guidance coming out that's going further than what we understood the law to be. So I'm very happy to hear that you did that webinar and that you're kind of clarifying these things. One question I get a lot, because I mentioned that a lot of people write about you in their applications to UVA Law, and you're a big reason people want to come. And
which blows me away and warms my heart.
Believe me, I see it all the time. And a question I get a lot is, if I were to be a student at UVA Law, how do I get involved in the Institute? And like, I think it would be helpful for people to understand, like, I think sometimes people think the Institute is like a physical place, right? How would you tell someone who's applying to the law school or admitted to the law school, like how does one get involved?
Yeah. So we involve lots of law students. So we hire a team of law students every year. So we have a significant number of research assistants working for the Institute. So we also hire students across grounds as well. So we hire undergraduates and we hire students at the School of Education, and we hire students at the School of Public Policy too, because they all bring something different.
Yeah,
to the
absolutely.
Institute.
And
so,
you have your full-time staff, right, on the ERI. Okay,
yeah.
Great.
So we usually have 8 to 10 research assistants working for us.
It's amazing.
And then I have 4 staff. So one thing to understand about the law school is there are centers, and then this institute is different from that in the sense that I have full-time staff working a full job just for the Institute.
Right.
Whereas most centers, so I run the Center for the Study of Race, that is typically something that puts on events at the law school, but there aren't full-time staff who every day, 40 hours a week, I'm focused on the Center for the Study of Race. I do great events for the Center for the Study of Race, but I do that along with my other faculty responsibilities like teaching, attending workshops, hiring faculty, all of the other things. And so it's not a full-time position. But the Education Rights Institute, I actually use some of the money that I was gifted to buy out my teaching so that I can run the Institute. I still teach a class on education reform every year, and I teach a seminar on ethical values, but I had to create some space to manage 4 people and to do all the research and the videos and the webinars and the one-pagers and all the things. So there was no way it would have been 2 full-time jobs. So I have cut back some on my teaching, but I still teach every year.
I want to talk about what you're teaching, but I'm also so glad you reminded me about this, because this was something that I kept reading about, that the Education Rights Institute was funded with a gift from an anonymous donor.
Yes.
Like $5 million almost.
Yeah.
You really,
almost.
Like 4.9, I think.
Yeah.
So you really don't know who it was?
No, I know who it was.
Oh, you know.
But it's not disclosed.
Okay. Well, we of course don't have to,
Yes, no, I know exactly who it was. It's the same people who approached me from a foundation who said, we want to get a sense of what you're thinking about education because we've heard great things about you.
Oh, that's
and so that's
great.
who I went to ask for a lot of money. And the funny story about $4.9 million is I actually asked them for $15.3 million. So they said, when I said, can I pitch to you? And they said, sure, just make sure it doesn't exist anywhere else in the country. And we know what exists because we've been doing these listening tours. That's how we found you. And they said, dream big, go for it.
Wow.
And so I put together a proposal for $15.3 million. And I wanted to help not just districts. I notice I talk a lot about districts and schools. I wanted to help states too. And as you can imagine, helping whole states is like a much bigger scale. Even if you just had like a handful of states, it's still a massive undertaking. And so I presented to them this $15.3 million proposal, and they said, well, that's a lot of money. And I said, you said dream big. So I went and dreamt big. And here's my $15.3 million proposal, which now I realize really should have been like 35, 40 million. There's so much work to be done that was actually a modest ask.
Yeah.
And so they said, if you get it under $5 million, we'll consider it favorably. So that's how I just went under the $5 million. But we are fundraising all the time now.
As you should be, because just hearing all the things that you're doing, I mean, as we've discussed, those things cost money, right?
Yes, and we want to work with districts across the country, and that takes a lot of people. So we're doing tons of fundraising,
So far, I guess it's been about 2 years since
a little over 2 years.
Yeah. What are you sort of proudest about in this moment, in the 2 years of work that you've done so far with the Institute?
What I'm proudest about is that we're expanding educators' understanding of what civil rights protections are, because there's a lot of confusion right now and there's a lot of fear. So I was just at a conference last week where I was with grant makers who give money to education, and they just really confirmed that educators in the classroom are very scared about what they can and can't say, can and can't do. School leaders are scared, district leaders are scared. And so we are trying to help address that by explaining, here's what the law said. The law is actually very pro, equal educational opportunity. It is pro-student. It is very much focused on ensuring all students thrive, and helping educators understand that can really, I feel, change the landscape for education as we kind of grow and expand. Yeah.
Yeah. I know part of your own backstory was that you actually moved, right? To get to a better school district?
Yes. Yeah. So when I was 9, my family moved from one state to Midlothian, where we grew up. So we moved to Virginia. And my parents specifically told us, we are moving so that you and your brother can get a better education.
Wow.
And then there's a later point in life when I was like, one, it's always hard to move on the kid, right? The kid is like, I don't want to leave my friends. I don't want to leave my school. Why are we moving? And my parents were very clear. It's to get you a better education. And education is, the path for your future.
Yeah.
So we have to do this. And we left my mom's sister behind.
Wow.
We left just family behind. So I realize now that I'm a parent and have 3 daughters, how hard that was for her. And so, what struck me later was, what about the kids that didn't move from where I was in school? My brother was being bullied. I just wasn't being challenged very much. And so I think, what would my path have been that way? And then what about all the families that can't move? Like, why can't every kid in one of the wealthiest nations in the world have a high-quality education? So that is the ultimate mission of the Institute, is to ensure that all students have access to a high-quality education and that it prepares them to be college and career-ready and engaged civic participants. And so it should not be necessary to move, leave behind your community, leave behind family and support systems to pursue a better public school. And so that is definitely kind of the driving passion behind the Institute, which I recognize that is a bold and audacious goal, but I am committed to pursuing it.
Dream big.
Yes.
I love it. I love it. I want to talk a little bit about your teaching, because you mentioned you did have to sort of, with running the Institute, teach a little bit lighter load, but you mentioned you teach a seminar in ethical values. So I would love, can you share for listeners like what that is? Because I think it's a special offering that we have at UVA. What's your, I think there's a topic every year.
Yes. Yeah, so I only learned about these after I'd been at UVA for a little bit. And so seminars in ethical values are topics that professors identify, and they typically bring They have small groups of students, so it's up to 12 students. And you oftentimes meet in the professor's home. I take my students sometimes to a restaurant, but either way, you have an intimate conversation with the professor and your classmates about a particular topic that relates in some way to ethical values. So my seminar on ethical values is Women of the Supreme Court. And you do 6 meetings a year for these seminars, and so there are 6 women that have been or are on the Supreme Court. So it works out beautifully.
That's great.
And so we study those women. We read their biographies or autobiographies, and we discuss their career paths. We discuss, their childhood, everything from undergraduate to law school to their practice of law until they land on the court. And it's fascinating. You see some really interesting things that are similar for them across the board, and then you see real differences between them. And it's a wonderful course. I love teaching it. The students really enjoy it. It's really a joyful experience, yeah.
What I would give to be able to take that course. That sounds incredible.
Really great. Yeah. And then we also talk about I also use it to just share some of my own story about, my husband's a professor at the law school and at the School of Public Policy. And so our journey of the biographies often talk about managing like family and work and what all that means. And so I talk a little bit about our journey and what that's been like and moving for each other's jobs and all of that. And so you see all of that in these stories, like sacrifices they're making for a spouse making a sacrifice for them. And so it's also a way for me to nurture the students and help them to know like it's not easy managing all of these different responsibilities, but it's well worth it to still pursue your legal career, and if you want to like have a spouse, have a family, to do that.
I think that's so important for them to hear at this stage because it's not talked about enough. I remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg talked about it quite a bit with her husband and how they, going back and forth, like Columbia Law School, like I just remember that. But I think it's so great you're having those conversations and like modeling for them how it works. I am curious, where did you meet your husband?
Oh, so that's a fun story. We met, it's a very Washington, D.C. story. So we met at the U.S. Department of Education when I was an attorney there. Yeah, so I was practicing law there. And so I interacted with the secretary as an attorney, but I'm several levels down from the attorney. I was a general staff attorney. Like I was not high up in the general counsel's office. But I had been in meetings with the Secretary of Education before. And so actually when I was going on the market to become a professor, I ran into the secretary on my flight to an interview. And of course I didn't say I was going to interview, but I did talk with the secretary on the flight because I was like, I was in a meeting with you a month ago. Like I'm one of your attorneys. And so he said, sure, come sit with me. So I sat on a flight with the U.S. Secretary of Education, Rod Page. It was in the Bush administration, and sat with him, and we just talked for ages. And we had these really great conversations. And he said, what do you think about this? And I said, I disagree with that because here's why. And and so one of the things to understand about working for the government is very hierarchical.
Yes.
You do not approach the secretary and talk to them about policy issues. And so I just felt like this is my chance to chat with the secretary and to make a difference. And so I took it. And so I got back to my office, and the general counsel calls me, who is like several tiers above me. He's the head of the office. And he said, did you approach the secretary on a plane and chat with him about policy? And I said, yes, I did. And he said, okay, well, the secretary enjoyed the conversation. He wants to meet with you. And what I was told was that the secretary is not usually used to people disagreeing with him, that you told him what you thought and you disagreed with him, and people around him weren't doing that much. And so he appreciated it. So he asked to meet with me. And so when I went to meet with the secretary, my husband was the meeting before me with the Secretary of Education.
No.
So he was in the waiting room, and I was called up from my office. But of course, there's this long queue because it's a cabinet level official. And so we're all queued up to wait for the secretary to be available. And eventually they just sent me back to my office. They're like, it's going to be a while, so you should just go back to work. And we'll call you when you're ready. So they called me, and my husband was walking out, and I was walking in, and he just said, hi, I'm Gerard Robinson.
Oh.
And I said, hi, I'm Kimberly Jenkins at the time.
Oh, my
And then we met,
gosh.
and it turned out that he was studying at UVA. And I was like, oh, I went to UVA. And he was at Harvard before that. I was like, oh, I was at Harvard, which we were at Harvard at the same time. He
What?
went to the School of Education, and I was at the law school. But we overlapped. I'm sure we were at the same, some of the same events, but we just never met there because he wasn't ready yet. That's the line I'm sticking to since he's not here to disagree with me.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh,
so now we're both
so-
professors at
I
UVA,
was
which
gonna
is
say,
so full circle.
It is another full circle moment. I love
Yes.
that story so much.
Yeah.
Just goes to show, like, disagreeing with a cabinet level official can lead to,
Great things.
these wonderful things.
Yes. Looking back, I was like, wow, that was really, maybe because I was interviewing and I knew I was on the way out, I thought, well, if they, I didn't think they were going to fire me, but I did know that it was unusual to approach your boss and just say, here's what I think we should be
Yeah,
focused on.
exactly. Well, I mean, it all worked out.
It all worked out. Yes. Yeah, and we call him on our anniversary.
Oh.
And, just chat with him because he's the reason we met. Like,
I love that.
yeah, he's a friend of my husband. So, yeah, we
that's so
call
great.
him and say, like, yeah, well, we wouldn't be here without you.
Oh,
yeah.
my gosh. Okay, so I want to be mindful of time. So I just want to ask one or two more questions.
Sure.
So you mentioned, I do have to bring this up. You mentioned your seminar on ethical values. You're studying the 6 women who have or are currently on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
One of them is a very good friend of yours.
Yes.
From Harvard Law School.
Yes.
Justice Jackson.
Yes.
And I know I was very, very, very sadly out of the country when you hosted her at
The law school.
At the law school. I read every single piece of coverage I could at the time. And it's my colleagues who went said it was absolutely amazing. So I'm just curious, for listeners, what is it like being friends with a Supreme Court justice? Is it just sort of like being friends with anybody else?
So Justice Jackson and I were law school roommates. And so I've known her since her 20s, right?
Yeah.
So in some ways it is just like being friends with anyone else in the sense that when big things happen, like when she was elevated to the district court, I went and celebrated her, and we stay in touch and we'll visit and other things. The ways it's different. So for example, when she was on the federal district court, I could go up to DC, have lunch with her around the corner and go back. But now logistically, that's very, very difficult. Like it involves Secret Service if we go for a meal or whatever. And so it's different in the sense that she within Washington loses a lot of privacy.
Yeah.
And so you can't just go hey, let's go walk around the National Gallery of Art and go take a walk, right? That's not going to happen. Or if it did happen, it would involve a lot of people surrounding her at all times. And so that's been interesting to watch. But she still does get to do lots of fun things and vacations and other things. So I've seen her in more casual settings where the Secret Service is in the background, right? They're not right there surrounding her. So those are nice moments, but it is different.
it is.
Scheduling is definitely much more.
I was going to say it takes more planning.
It takes a lot more planning.
Yeah.
But I'm also so proud of her.
Of course.
She's just
it's so,
crushing it, and she's doing a great job. And she was brilliant then, and she's brilliant now. And I just am a huge fan. So I'm a friend, but I'm also she's just amazing.
I have read in a few places that you saw something in her back then. Yeah. I think you famously said to your now husband on your first date, your roommate's going to be the first black woman on the Supreme Court. What did you see in her? Was it the sheer brilliance, or was there something else?
There's a lot of brilliant people at Harvard Law School. There's a lot of really smart people.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just her intelligence. Mm-hmm. It was more that she is the total package in the sense that she is brilliant, but she's approachable and down to earth
Yeah.
and very warm and friendly, and she can laugh at herself. And she was not someone who had sharp elbows with her classmates. She was very, she's a humble person. Like, she's not hyper competitive or anything like that. And there was a lot of that at Harvard, a lot of just, like, for example, when the clerkship, so I was on law review, as was Justice Jackson, as was two other faculty at the law school, Rich Schrager and David Law. We were all on the law review together.
How
yeah,
funny.
the four of us. Yep. And then Professor Rowe was also in our law school class. So there's 4 faculty from the same Harvard Law School class at the law school. Fun fact.
I love this.
And then, so so many of us applied for clerkships, and so people would post what judges were calling. You didn't say who. You didn't put your name that you were called, but simply you would know when judges were calling, because a lot of that, we were applying to many of the same courts, and so it's like, this judge is now making calls, and so that was tracking that. But it was definitely just a competitive sort of thing, and so she was not competitive anyway. She was just she was crushing it, but she was not seeking to crush other people on the way to her own success.
And look where she ended up.
Yeah,
right?
and that's one of the things I love about UVA Law School is that it's so collaborative and warm and friendly. Like, when I was a visiting professor before I got the offer to be here permanently, I noticed how happy the students were, and I was like, what? I finally started asking the students, I was like, why are you so happy here? And they just talked about just how nurtured they felt at the law school, what a warm, friendly place it was. Like, one of them said, well, we're never hangry because there's so many meals and stuff all around the building all the time, which I thought was hilarious.
That's good.
But yeah, I was like, this is my 3rd law school that I'm teaching at. And I was like, this is definitely the happiest group of law schools I've ever experienced, law students I've ever experienced. And there is something special about the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Well, before we go, one thing I always love to ask guests, and I feel that, man, there are so many more things I wish we could chat about, but I know how incredibly busy you are. This show is, mostly for folks who are thinking about law school, or they're actively applying to law schools, or maybe they're already admitted to some law schools and they're deciding. But what advice would you give to folks out there who are considering law school, and what would you want them to know?
So I would say it's interesting because our daughter is going through college admissions. So we're deep in admission season in our house. Deep. So I would say that, and tell me if I'm wrong about this because you're the one reading them all, is everyone who's applying to UVA Law School wants to come to law school. So then showcase some other part of who you are. Weave your interest in law into that in some way. But I would want to know, what are you bringing other than a passion for law? Like, how are you going to enrich this wonderful community that we've built? That is what I would want to know. But I don't know if that's what the admissions committee wants to know. But
I agree 100%.
Okay.
And I think the way that I usually frame it is, it has to be personal to you. Like, it's called a personal statement, right? And so that's like the main essay. There are other essays and ways to communicate certain things. But yes, I mean, what are you specifically bringing? Yes, talk about your purpose for law school, but where did that come from, right? There's an authenticity, and I think people maybe try to keep it a little bit professional and veer too far away from personal. So I couldn't agree more, I think.
Yeah, I would want people to show me who you are. Like, something about your core values, your core commitments, I would want to know, who are you at the end of the day? And just why I want to go to law school, here are the 3 reasons, would not tell me that. But maybe some really impactful thing that happened that led you to want to study law, or something that you hope to correct with your law degree, or something like that. I would want to know something beyond, I want to be a lawyer. I'd want to know, show me who you are. That's what I would want. But I don't have to read all the admissions files.
Well, I could not improve on that advice. Honestly, I think that's going to be my new, I might use that, actually,
Yes, feel
in a
free.
Q&A. Show me who you are.
Yeah.
Professor Robinson, Kimberly, this was so wonderful. I cannot thank you enough for making the time. I know your schedule is just crazy, so I think this is going to be seriously inspiring and entertaining. So thank you so much.
It was my pleasure.
This has been Admissible with me, Dean Natalie Blazer at the University of Virginia School of Law. My guest today was UVA Law professor and Education Rights Institute director, Kimberly Jenkins Robinson. For more information about UVA Law, please visit law.virginia.edu. The next episode of Admissible will be out soon. In the meantime, you can follow the show on Instagram at Admissible Podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and please remember to rate the show wherever you listen to podcasts.